Hello and welcome to today's A-Team webinar. Topic of today's conversation is high-performance real-time multi-stream data processing for trading analytics and risk management. My name is Andrew Delaney. I'm President and Chief Content Officer at A-Team Group, and very much here to welcome you to our conversation today. We've got a great panel and a great topic to talk about. Let me quickly give you a feel for what it is we will be discussing. The premise here is that financial analytics platforms, hedge funds and other sort of high performance user types are often segmented between real-time and back office analytics systems fed by slower batch processes. And to build out a winning analytics framework, hedge funds and other trading firms really need to bring together the real-time streams with historical analysis into a single high-performance data store that can allow them to refresh reports and risk models in close to real time. So we're going to be talking about integrating real-time data streams with historical data sets. We're going to talk about managing on cloud and on-prem to optimize performance, and we're going to look at how to cope with data volume spikes and managing unstructured data sets, among other interesting topics. We'll be taking audience questions through our Slido application. So if you would like to ask a question and indeed to take part in our polls that we'll be running on today's session, please do click on the Slido button and get involved. That would be great. Without further ado, I think then we'll move on and ask everybody to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start off with Joe Peters from Bridgewater Associates. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Joe Peters, Bridgewater Associates. I'm our head of data development and responsible for the technology and services that my firm uses to integrate with external data and external data feeds and provide, transformations and other services for our researchers, trading groups, and others.
Fabulous. Thanks for joining us, Joe. Hugh Davidson, Man Group. Welcome, Hugh.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks. Hugh Davidson. I'm the head of data management here at Man Group. I kind of wear two hats. I'm responsible for BI development at Man Group, and I'm also responsible for the monitoring and cost attribution of our kind of paid for market data as well.
Fabulous. Thanks for joining us. Eric Cartman.
Yes, welcome. Hi. Thank you. My name is Eric Cartman. I'm an independent consultant, basically specializing in the hedge fund community. My clients are some of the leading hedge funds, and I help them to build and improve trading platforms to meet current market demands.
Thank you, Eric. And Eric, of course, is a valued member of our advisory panel who here at A-Team helps us design many panels and events. So thanks for all your help, Eric. Last but not least, Ray Cunil of Yellow Brick Data, our sponsors today. Welcome, Ray.
Good morning. My name is Ray. I work with Yellow Brick. My background has been about 33 years working with customers migrating to analytical environments. Pretty much across the board, I've worked with market makers, hedge funds, as well as compliance institutions like FINRA and SEC. Fabulous.
Thank you. Again, thanks for joining us and thanks for your support of Yellow Brick. Okay, so we're going to get straight into the Q&A and then we'll get into some polls and some audience questions as they come in. Those audience questions will come to me and I'll try to feed them in to our conversation. So the first question is really a sort of scene setter. We're going to throw this one to Eric and then run through the panel briefly. Eric, let's go to you first then. What are the opportunities for hedge funds presented by the emerging ability to bring together real-time and historical data into a single high-performance data store?
Yeah, I think data is the critical element right now. And what I'm seeing, most of the hedge funds I'm dealing with, they are adding more and more data sources. and it gets added into the real-time decision-making process, the investment engine sort of, right? So the data can come in from regular market data sources, but it's also more and more I'm seeing the alternative data being added, right? All kinds of transactional data, scrapped data from websites, sentiment data analysis, news, and so on. This is all coming in an unstructured fashion, and a system needs to be able to process this data and make it a part of the seamless data processing layer, investment management, investment analysis layer. So that's where the difficulty comes in. And so, and you have very little time to interpret this data and make decisions. So that's where this type of unified data platform is quite critical.
Very good, thank you. So we've got lots more data sources. Joe, you agree with that? Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I'd say there's two things. One, there's lots more data sources, and then even the technologies are starting to really evolve, particularly when we talk about the cloud and what they're bringing to bear. So what you see in things like data marketplaces and other hosted solutions is a single place where you can go and get access to lots of different data streams. In addition to that, you have implementing, within your current environment in the cloud, exceptional scalability. So you have to, you don't have to worry as much about how am I going to scale to be able to absorb this data. That sort of like goes away. Now we'll get into it later. There's still, what's the business case for this? Does this actually make sense? But some of the barriers that have existed in the past are being torn down that will really enable us to take advantage of many, many different streams, real-time, historical, and integrate with them much more seamlessly than we have in the past.
Very good, thank you. Hugh, bring you into the conversation. Does that all resonate with you? And we're coming back to the central idea here. What's the opportunity here?
It does resonate. I mean, from my side, myself and my team work with large numbers of disparate data sources, and we've found over the years that if you create a single data store, then you're basically removing risk, because you're removing these kind of separate siloed data stores that users within the organization might be using. You're creating like a single source of truth, so that that everyone's going to the same data, everyone agrees with it, all the systems are pointing to the same thing. So there's that element of risk reduction. You're also kind of making things easier for your users, whereas before they might have need to know how to glue together various different data sets, data sources. You're now doing that for them, so they don't need to know what the relationship is between A and B. You do the work, you give them a nice endpoint where they can go and query it without needing to know, this relates to this, and potentially making mistakes in doing so. So it's about risk reduction, and it's about making things easier for our users.
Very good, thank you. And Ray, how do you see this?
Yeah, I kind of underscore exactly what Hugh says. I mean, when you start copying data and sharing data amongst different groups, then you increase your risk of doing something wrong, and just clipping data, changing the wrong data types, putting nulls in spaces, all kinds of bad things can occur. And so with modern architectures today, you can really share data, and just sharing data, you can actually share those data assets to different compute clusters, to different lines of business, but yet only have one of those gold copies of those individual data sets. In the old way, people would go through modeling exercises, star schema, third normal form. But today, there's no time for that. The data as it's coming in should be loaded. It should be model agnostic. The performance should just be there to be able to go after the data any which way you wish. And then for, the other thing, that kind of streaming data in real time or near real time always had obstacles, because with large volumes of data, people were forced to index it. And if you're ingesting large amounts of data, you have to rebuild the indexes. You're basically taking an outage. And so, today with modern architectures, you don't want to have to worry about indexing. You just want to be able to load and go. And so with that, now you can move towards streaming data sets and marry that data with the persistent historical data.
Very good, thank you all. Right, on that then, let's move to our first poll and see what the audience thinks about I think what we've both heard is it's almost like a holy grail of integrated data from multiple places. It's something that everyone's been wanting for quite some time. So here's the poll. The poll is going to ask, what are the main obstacles to implementing the kind of modern hybrid data infrastructure required to support high performance analytics? So you'll see that up on your screens, and please do vote in our Slido poll. There it is. And while you are voting, we'll move on and talk about how we'll ask the guys why this has been so difficult to achieve in the past. I'm going to go to Joe first for this one. I joined this industry in the 80s, Joe, and the only integration between a Telerate terminal and the Dow Jones newspaper gallery that I used to have to put data into was yours truly. It was a truly manual process. What we're talking about now is many, many different types of data sets. But why has it been so difficult?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things. One is it does take real investment. Even today, we'll get into that. It takes real investment, both in terms of dollars and in terms of time. As Hugh and Ray both pointed out, and I completely agree, there's all sorts of opportunity to create sort of like single sources of truth and things like that. And there's lots of reasons why you want to do that. However, even in that world, you still have to have governance. And so even using your example, Andrew, if it all lives with you, imagine scaling that out and trying to do that enterprise-wide. You need a set of rules, you need a set of standards, things like that. And you have to, there's a lot of buy-in that requires, and a lot of folks have to agree on that. And then really, in order to get that, you have to have real business cases, right? So we talked about some of the risk reduction and things like that. But one of the most compelling, at least for me, is something that Hugh hit on, which is this notion of enablement. And how do I enable my users to operate more effectively and not have to go to lots of different places in order to get data? Well, that requires a bit of a story. And so I think that's one of the answers in the polls, like getting management buy-in. So how is the solution that I'm proposing going to actually connect back to my business case? And that's not always easy. And sometimes that solution can get much more expensive. I think it's getting cheaper and cheaper with some of the enablement options that we have, but it still takes a real investment there. And so those are difficult challenges to overcome. And it takes everyone sort of like getting together and agreeing that this is exactly where we want to go, because it's going to take time and energy and effort.
Very good. Thank you. Eric, from your perspective, we're moving in the right direction, but it's been a long time. Why?
Yeah, I completely agree with Joe, and just to add here is, yeah, I mean, we used to just deal with market data. It's very clear. You have one provider, you have a plug-in adapter to receive that data, and you can easily plug this in to your system. Right now, when we're talking about unstructured data, when we're talking about real-time data coming in streams, and then there's a historical data, or there's some kind of alternative data that's coming in, you got to marry all of them in your system and make sense of it. So that becomes difficult. There are different formats. There are different types of distribution of this data. There are different mechanisms of receiving and processing the data at each fund's location. There's a difference in process of what how you make sense to it. There is also, there's sometimes Chinese walls and other things you have to implement to secure this data from, different groups that are not supposed to see this data. So there's a lot of that governance and other things that take into place, and you got to do it in reasonable time, because there's a competitive pressure that you want to make sense of this data before your competitors do, to make a tradable decisions. So this, becomes quite challenging without the modern architecture, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Ray, any more thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, some thoughts about take that data governance. Another angle is the security and privacy. In the cloud, people always love the elasticity of that, and the ability of just load up, share some data, and have a SaaS offering that can actually do that. But what a lot of people are concerned about is encryption of data and encryption in transit is table stakes. But what a lot of people don't understand is when you're using a SaaS offering for some sort of data provider, they're actually, you're giving your data over to them. and they're storing it within their cloud account. And if you're okay with that and you get a security buy off of their encryption and everything, that's good. But what a lot of people don't realize is the metadata is also just as important. And so where is that metadata? These third-party providers, these data warehousing solutions, they keep the metadata in another database, if it will. And the metadata itself it should be private. The log data. So for example, if I were to select for a client to see, what their portfolio value is based on, Eric and Eric's information, well, then that is actually the fact that we're keeping track of those attributes and those objects is the metadata itself. And maybe we don't want to share that with other tenants in that SaaS offering.
Very good, thank you. So let's have a quick look at the slide results. What we're seeing is complexity of current setup seems to be the overwhelming winner here in terms of the single biggest obstacle. Some of those security privacy concerns, lack of expertise, quite low on the lack of senior management buy-in. Perhaps they've been convinced. Guys, initial thoughts. I think it was you, Joe, who mentioned the buy-in thing. We've come a long way then.
Yeah, I think that's good. I'm glad people are starting to get the buy-in. The complexity of the current setup certainly resonates insofar as we're talking about loads more data than we were 10 years ago in a lot of these cases. And with more data comes more complexity. One of the things that we found is that what's been nice is there are a lot of people that are trying to solve this problem, in financial world and other spaces. And so there are a lot of frameworks for how to manage these types of things. And so one of the things I'm hopeful for is that with these frameworks, which are never perfect, you wind up looking at, different solutions that cloud providers put out there in terms of building a data lake or a data warehouse or something like that. They almost always require some modification for your purpose. But nevertheless, they put a lot of thought into that, and such that I think that the complexity conceptually is still there, but the solutions are starting to really evolve. That while they may not be plug and play, they certainly make it easier for someone to go look at. Okay, well, here's my problem. Here's some off-the-shelf ideas, and then I can pick and choose what it is that I need in order to implement that. So I'm hopeful for that going forward as well, because it is, when you talk about 100x more data than you were talking about 10 or 15 years ago, it does increase the complexity of your system overall.
Absolutely. Great, thank you. That's a great jumping off point to get into some of the practical challenges to creating that sort of a single framework or whatever we want to call it. And I think, Eric, you started to talk about some of these challenges, but let's draw you back in. Go to you first. So what do you see as the sort of the main practical challenges in making this happen as we look forward now?
Yeah, sure. And just to address the poll also, I think it's quite clear, right? The complexity is a result, if you look at the other items in the poll, right? So there's a privacy and security implementation that's difficult to implement. There's a lack of resources and talent to do this. So it's all related to complexity, right? So this is, I would say, I would answer it the same way by saying, the complexity is probably the most difficult part, because you're bringing some of the cloud resources, some of the in-house resources, some of the historical data, some of the real-time data, structured versus unstructured, how it's being distributed, messaging, and so on, right? So there's a lot of difficulties in this process, and that's what I kind of started saying in my previous answer, was that with the modern architecture, you're able to connect all those pieces together, and you don't really have to copy them necessarily, or duplicate it and create another massive data warehouse. You can just with the modern architecture, you can connect, you can expose to those data sources sitting in various locations, and being able to speed things up and being able to interpret that data in a very, very fast fashion.
Very good. Yeah, that's a very good point. But let's bring you back to the challenges, the practical challenges going forward. You did sort of get into a couple of those. what do you see as the main ones that we're worrying about now?
The practical challenges is, how do you connect all this data together? That's pretty much, that's technology, right? So technology, I would say, is, I don't think, I think the business side really wants this to happen. They are aware, they get people from different alternative data source organizations coming to them and telling them how they can improve their decision-making process by consuming that data. And then they go to the technology side and they'll say, well, guys, looks like we can do much better if we were to add this or that data source into our engine. And that becomes a pain of the technology organization by saying, well, we've done this all internally before within our data warehouse. We know how to handle this internally. Now, some of the data is going to be sitting externally. Some of the data is only available in the cloud. So how do we, merge all those two worlds? How do we create this hybrid environment that is as productive and usable as what we've traditionally done within the on-prem world?
Very good. Thank you. Joe, let's bring you in on this. In terms of challenges, in your experience, what are the obstacles, if you like?
Yeah, well, there's a lot. I'll call out one that I think is particularly nubby, which is both building a new and modern architecture while at the same time having to continue to run your business with your existing one. And how does that transition actually work? One thing you have to have at the beginning of your journey is a strategy of how do I want to do that? Do I want to renovate the thing that I have now? Do I want to build a new and sort of cut over? And then how does that work? That can be extremely challenging because you do wind up with probably systems that currently exist that have been built up over 10, 15, 20, 30 years and have lots of little Easter eggs in there that you have to deal with when building the new thing and ensuring that you've built something that's good, and then also when cutting over. It's one of the more difficult ones that I've seen, and it really does require strategy and some real thinking up front because that exists no matter what you do whenever you're cutting over to a new architecture, a new system. And so I'd call that out as somewhat separate, but definitely something that people put at the end of the journey, but you still have to have a view on how you're going to deal with that. And then, like I said earlier, there's still the practical challenges of things like governance, and there's still just work to put in, even in a new architecture, in a new environment, that you have to do no matter what.
Very good, thank you. Ray, last points on challenges.
Yeah, a lot of modern architectures are kind of assume that they're cloud only. And when you hear cloud native and modern architectures, they kind of go hand in hand. But solutions that are only on the cloud, you kind of put all your eggs in one basket there. In that you might have had a plan to get there, but you don't have any plan to get back. So you kind of burned all your boats and you're all in, and that's a difficult position to be in when that vendor actually knows that you can't leave. And so you really should have a foresight to be able to say, how do I have flexibility? Because in almost like the more modern architectures based on like Kubernetes, you really have the flexibility to be able to move solutions to the cloud and back on-prem whenever you wish to, because you can take advantage of all those microservices wherever it is deployed. And so that really actually, the proprietariness is one of the challenges that people should really be concerned about.
Okay, thank you. We're going to stay with you, Ray. We're going to stay with the sort of cloud theme, if you like. So for the next question, as practitioners embrace the cloud as part of their overall solution, what do you see as the security challenges? And you've touched on this a little bit. What are the security challenges and how can they be overcome, I should say?
Yeah, and I mentioned that at the top. You're handing your data over to somebody else, okay? And the metadata, all that is outside your cloud account, and you should be very aware of that. There are solutions like with Yellowbrick where a SaaS-like experience can be provided 100% within your cloud account, within your VPC, if it's like AWS. And so with that, everything is contained within your walls, although that you're deployed within AWS. And so from a security standpoint, that's great. Now you know that all your log data, all your metadata, all your data, everything is within your walls. But then in addition, you get to leverage the whole buying power that you, as the buying power that credits the money that you have with that cloud vendor, can transfer to your compute and storage.
It's interesting. We've been doing at A-Team, we've been doing some a survey around cloud adoption, particularly in the sort of trading environment. And one of the, a lot of people we spoke to are quite happy with the sort of, the line that, they believe that the large cloud operators have greater security, technology, and approaches than they could possibly have themselves. But then the flip side is, I think what you're driving at is the worry that there is a concentration risk if you haven't hedged across perhaps multiple cloud providers, a hybrid approach. And I think one of the guys we spoke to, so that if an operator goes down, I've got 20 applications in there. It's like one of my own data centers going down, and this is a challenge and a worry.
Exactly. I use the analogy of just power. Everyone loves the utility nature of electricity, but yet critical workloads have their own offline power supply generators. And so you must have that type of, when the internet is down, can you still process trades? Can you still process compliance reports? You should be able to do both. And so, having that, cloud concentration risk can hurt you.
Yeah. Good. Okay, thanks. Eric, what do you see as the sort of security challenges in the cloud environment? And again, how do you see them as being overcome? The hedge?
Yeah, well, I think the reality is, most of the hedge funds I'm dealing with, they're going into the cloud, right? So it used to be that the hedge funds were probably the slowest adopters of the cloud in the financial community space. And I see that changing, right? So that cloud wave reached the hedge funds at this point. So I think, it's not a point of like, well, what, whether we do something in the cloud or we don't. It's more of becomes the data security, data privacy issue, right? Which data is truly proprietary to us and is bread and butter of what we do, our secret sauce that we don't want to expose to anywhere to the cloud, and which data is we are paying for this, let's say, alternative data, but so can others. So it's not truly proprietary data. It's more of a private public data that we paid for. We need it for our analysis, for our models, but it can live anywhere. There's no point of bringing this and storing it in house and protecting it the same way like you do your private your private models and other data elements. So so that's where I see the practicality. So people are trying to approach it to create a hierarchy approach to the data, right? Data identification is a big thing, right? Which data is truly a private data that has to be protected with all kinds of ways. Which data has to be encrypted when transferred? Which data is sort of auxiliary and can be shared with partners, and so on. So that data classification is what how I see hedge funds are doing this and deciding on what can go into the cloud and what has to still stay on-prem.
Sure. So we've sort of moved here into the next part of the discussion, which are the data types that are better suited to cloud hosting versus others that perhaps are not. What do you see, Eric, as the determinants of what's appropriate or applicable? I mean, is it about latency? Is it about volume of data? Is there a way to sort of characterize data sets that would allow you to figure out which ones are appropriate for cloud and likewise not appropriate for cloud?
Sure. So there is a strategy element, right? So which execution strategy we're using. So obviously, if this is a high frequency fund or quantitative fund where every microsecond counts, obviously you probably are not doing this through the cloud. You're co-locating with an exchange or co-locating with a data center that's close to the exchange, because every lost microsecond counts here. So definitely that would be, so it's a strategy and the type of latency dependency that you have for that strategy. That's one way to look at it. The other is the regulatory stuff, right? So there are some regulatory requirements that tell you about what you have to do with certain private data, client data, some identifiers of customers and so on, that you have to protect based on the regulatory requirements. And then the third way is, your corporate requirements, right? The hedge fund has to decide, well, which data is really protected and is proprietary to us and has to be stored and has to be well protected, and which data can be moved to the cloud. And the last thing I would say is around this whole thing has to be, some kind of level of data governance, right? That basically, make sure the data is accessed correctly. There are adequate security controls implemented. There's accessibility, of a certain way that's being guaranteed, and everything is being archived and stored, traced, so that in case if you need to go back and figure out, what data has been compromised, it can be identified in the right way.
Very good, thank you. Ray, let's bring you in on this. In your travels, you've worked with a bunch of different firms across the spectrum. Are there a set of characteristics that say some data is cloud okay and others not?
Yeah, what I see a lot is the archival data is perfect for the cloud. And, so you get audits, you don't know when it's going to happen. And the old way used to be, the customers would keep data unloaded, backups. And if that audit ever occurred, then they would pull back that certain time period, and there would be that time period to actually extract and bring that back off of old archival storage and load it into the database to be able to then answer the question of the audit. Whereas with what's perfect in the cloud is that let's not back up any, that is our archival, and it's always in the database. But the beauty of the cloud is when it's down, you don't pay anything. So again, if you're 100% your cloud account, your VPC, you can continually ingest that data very, very slowly because you don't really care. It's just archival. But when that day comes and that audit appears, if you want to go back 15 years or 20 years, it's just a matter of spinning up the cluster, however volume you want, and compute, because storage and compute are separated, and then you can go after that data. So it's just perfect for that. And then one day, maybe the real-time data feeds for reporting that Eric talks about, that can actually go off to the cloud, and you could actually run your reporting there. And so what some of the customers are doing is just bifurcating the loads. So you have those execution engines, but taking that data feed and bifurcate the loads to on-prem and in the cloud, and then they can they hedge their risk. They can say, hey, we can either go in the cloud or we can go on-prem, and then when they're comfortable, they can maybe swing one way.
Very good, thank you. Okay, in a moment, we're going to talk about skill shortages. It's something that's affecting the industry across the board, and obviously, given the complexity, the way this particular segment of the marketplace is going, I'm sure that's going to be a major factor. So we'll come back to that in a second. We're going to do a poll before we go to that question, and the next poll is talking about. Is asking really whether your firm has experienced skill shortages for specialists or technicians with experience of, here's some fairly specialist database environments, and are you suffering from shortages of people who can help you with them? So we've got Hadoop, KDB+, SQL Server, and got an other bracket. So please do fire away and vote. Let me take this opportunity to remind you that we also take questions through the Slido. So if you have any questions for our esteemed panel, now would be a good time to ask them, because we're going to start running out of time. Okay, so while our audience votes on this, let's ask the panel. Starting with you, Joe, how are skill shortages restricting hedge funds' ambitions to implement sophisticated hybrid data analytics infrastructures? Can you get the people to help you?
Yeah, it's a good question. First, the realization is yes, there are shortages. It's a battle for resources, for talent in this space, and so we experience that. Everyone does, and one of the interesting things is just how connected the entirety of now it's very much a technology industry as opposed to sort of financial technology. So, you know, if Meta goes out and hires 10,000 people, that has an impact on everyone, and vice versa. And so you're seeing some interesting changes in the tech talent pool right now that has an impact on us and anyone looking for tech talent. So I'd say there's two things that we tend to think about and would be my sort of pieces of advice. One would be to sort of look far and wide. We look not just onshore but offshore. Where are the opportunities? Where are the resources? Where can we find tech talent and not be terribly dogmatic about how that works. The second thing that we look at very closely is the stratification of what we have our tech talent doing. And so you don't want a senior architect writing ETL scripts to go onboard data. And we constantly stare at that just to make sure that we're getting the most out of our tech talent at every single level. And we hire accordingly. There are certain skill sets that we need and that are important and critical to what we're trying to do that are fairly plentiful. And then there are others and other parts of what we need that are much more scarce. And so particularly for the scarce ones, when you do get talent, you have to be very mindful of what it is that they're working on and what they're doing in order to get the highest and best use out of them while they're there. Very good. Thanks for that insight. Hugh, what's your experience here?
Well, I'd echo everything that Joe just said. I mean, very similar experience. What I would say from personal experience is don't be too prescriptive about what you're looking for. You know, don't get too hung up on finding exactly the right person with exactly the right technology experience, with exactly the right kind of industry experience. Look outside of that little box. So what we've done and what's worked well for us is that we've started to consider kind of alternative career paths. So we don't necessarily look for like a database developer from that skill set. You know, we might consider people who've come down the tech support route, the DevOps route, other routes where they may have come into contact with data but not done it as their kind of core skill. We've also kind of started looking far more widely outside the kind of academic route. So we work quite closely with people who encourage kind of returns to work. So people who've been out doing long-term care responsibilities, be they parents or other carers, get them in. They can bring a wealth of experience, not necessarily the tech experience, but a wealth of kind of business experience. We partner with organizations, one of which springs to mind, called Code First Girls, where they are looking to bring females into the industry, again, via not necessarily kind of technical routes. They may have come through other routes, but they train them up. They kind of give them a degree, it's like a sort of 3-month compressed thing where they'll get the skills and then they'll get placed. So those sort of things have worked really well for us. I think the other thing is to look at what you've already got. So don't ignore the people you already have working for you. That you may have someone who's fantastic at doing something, but not the skill you're looking for. Well, we firmly believe that kind of tech skills can be learned, but having a kind of natural aptitude to working with data is potentially harder to learn. So you may have someone working on the help desk or working in a kind of analytics role where they are passionate for data, but they don't have the technical skills. It's often quicker and cheaper to train them up than it is to go out to market and find someone with those skills. So I think those sort of things are really important. And I think the final point I'd make is that in this post-pandemic world, you need to accept that people you're hiring have got potentially different ideas about their working environment to what people used to have. So you can't get hung up on saying you've got to be in the office 5 days a week, you've got to work these hours. You need to be flexible and you need to work around what people expect now. So hybrid working is here to stay, certainly for us. It's working well. There are some things that it's brilliant for. If someone's got a discrete piece of work, set them off on that. They can work very well from home. There are some things it's less good at. For those kind of early project brainstorming sessions where you want to get everyone around a whiteboard, doesn't lend itself so well to remote working, but it's a balancing act. And I think we're finding that by giving people the kind of flexibility to work how and where they want within reason, it's working very well for us. We're able to kind of leverage that and get a really kind of productive workforce.
Very good, thank you. Before I bring Eric and Ray into this topic, maybe we can look at the results of the poll. KDB plus, shortages, Hadoop, not so much SQL Server. So Eric, with that context, what's your take on skill shortages in this particular segment, really?
It makes a lot of sense, right? So, I mean, KDB is quite specialized, tool with its own proprietary language, and so absolutely, there's a limited. It's going to be much more limited pool of resources able to support KDB versus a SQL Server or any of the other traditional database technologies. So that's quite expected, I would say. I think I agree with Hugh and with and with other participants that you just basically go with various options available to you, right? So sometimes you may have to bring in a vendor, right? Maybe you're going to bring in KDB, or maybe you're going to bring one tick, or maybe you're going to bring Yellow Brick, or somebody that's going to know specific technology to help you get onboarded and learn the product. But then you also need to have a plan of training your own staff in this technology. So it's not, you don't expect the vendor to be supporting you forever, or it's going to be a very expensive proposition. So you're going to find out, like Hugh said, for example, if you have people strong with data skills, but not knowing this particular technology and willing to learn, well, maybe put them behind that person from KDB or that person from OneTick or whatever the technology is, and let them learn this so that they can be supporting and utilizing this technology, helping to utilize this technology further for the firm. And then the same way with outsourcing talent, right? So there's, again, just like the cloud, right? The notion before was that hedge funds don't outsource, hedge funds don't offshore any of the work. Again, that's changing. Most of my clients, most of the large hedge funds I'm dealing with, they outsource some of the work, they offshore, they give some of the work to consultants in various jurisdictions. But what's important here is just like what we discussed with the data elements, right? Deciding what you can outsource, what's the secret sauce that you have to build and test internally, and what's more generic piece of code, maybe just handling messages, streaming, DevOps work, right? Some of that maybe not as hard to outsource without worrying about breaches and losing some proprietary knowledge.
Very good, thank you, Eric. Ray, your perspective on these skill shortages?
Yeah, so it kind of resonates with me because I think what's interesting is other proprietary platforms, and in most data processing engines are proprietary. And what I find is interesting is that the #1 most popular database is Postgres, and that beats Oracle, SQL Server, all of them. And one of the things that we happen to do at Yellow Brick was, last thing somebody needs is another proprietary database. So maintaining that Postgres interface from the outside world. Now, how we execute stuff is totally different, but you don't have to worry about that. So what that means is all the tooling that the skilled talent out there might have it's already connected to Postgres and works. And then to that point about KDB, that resonates with me for a hedge fund that I work with, that they were basically, they were a hostage of that talent pool. And that talent pool was, because they only knew KDB, that's what they would use it for probably the wrong thing. And so there was one architect that said, listen, we're just trying to do simple things, bars, which was trying to say, look, a window of time, trade and quote data. I want to look at a window of time. That window might be 30 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, or 1 minute. I just want to know the first price that came in, then the max, average, and min. He goes, why do I need KDB for that? I could do that in any database, but why do we do it in KDB? And so they just put the challenge to me, and I said, start from scratch, load 1 billion records, did it in 2 minutes, and then run through that analysis, not on a given symbol, but on the whole 1 billion records, all 3,000 symbols, could run that in 6 seconds. And just totally blew away what they could do with KDB. And it was like, you could run this from Excel, you could run it from Tableau, you could run it from Python, you could do whatever you want because it all connects to Postgres and connects to us. And so because of that, they became a customer. And it was really interesting. And you see that over history, like people would just use the wrong tool for the wrong thing. Like they would use SAS, for BI when it's an analytics tool. It's just using the wrong tool for the wrong job. So I think you can fix your talent pool problem by using the right tooling.
Very good. Actually, that's very interesting. We've actually got a question from the audience, and I think this may be picking up on something that Hugh mentioned around diversity and whatnot. ESG considerations in the workforce and what we need to worry about. Any thoughts, guys, on expanding the sort of diversity side of things?
I mean, certainly from our side, we've found, and we're far from perfect, we've got a long way to go, but we found that looking at a more diverse pool of talent it's paid dividends. We've moved away from the traditional kind of developer, if you like, and we've got a whole range of people now. And I think it kind of resonates with something I said earlier, which is that each person brings something from their background, and the tech side can always be learned, and that's what we've learned. You can pick up the skills, you can learn the skills, but having a diverse group of individuals just brings so much to the table because they've all got their own, unique take on things, how things should be done. It's been a huge win, and we're looking to to diversify further, but it's hard. It's really hard because you can want to do it, but then you still need to go and find the diverse pool of people. But no, I'm a huge advocate of it. Very good.
Okay, we are going to start running out of time, so let me stay with you, Hugh. And actually, we've got another audience question. Let me see. As we migrate workloads from legacy platforms to the cloud or move apps among cloud platforms, the interoperability of platforms becomes apparent. How should we manage this? So I guess the question is about the sort of interoperability between multiple cloud platforms, perhaps on-prem platforms. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Well, I know we don't have an issue with that because it's a single pane of glass and the interface is SQL. So regardless if it's in GCP, Azure, AWS, or on-prem, it's all the same. So you're 100% portable from one to the other.
Ray, you stole my comment. I mean, I was going to say that if you choose, a system like Yellowbrick or a system, a hybrid platform that basically connects two worlds together, you're already one step into the game, right?
You should be able to take your data wherever you want.
Exactly. You can start with that. You can start with that, and you're not under pressure to really move quickly, to migrate it fully from on-prem to the cloud. You can live in this hybrid environment while you're slowly migrating applications if you decide to.
It goes back to burning your boats. If you choose a target platform, let's say it's like a Snowflake or a Redshift, you burned your boats. You can't come back. There is no Redshift or Snowflake on-prem. There never will be. They say that. So you kind of create your own challenges by going through there. Pick an architecture that gives you that flexibility. You should be able to bring your data wherever you want, deploy it anywhere, take control of the stuff.
Very good. I think that actually plays into our final question for today. And we're going to start this one with Hugh, and that is, how should firms approach putting in place a modern data infrastructure to support their analytics strategy? So, what's the approach? How do you start? What should you be thinking about?
I think the most important thing to remember is that there's no kind of one size fits all. So what works for one company may not necessarily be right for another. But what I found is that if you're going down the hybrid route, there are certain things that you need to consider right at the initial kind of design phase. So the kind of big ticket items on our list that we thought about and we came up with solutions for was how do we have parity of service, parity of capability between the on-prem part of our solution and the cloud part? So I'm talking about ensuring you've got automated deployment regardless, the security on-prem and in the cloud. How do you monitor? We have monitoring in place for on-prem, but when we first started doing stuff on the cloud, we didn't, so we had to build that out. How do you kind of maintain the connectivity? What I'd also say is that when you're starting to look at kind of bringing together data into a new data store, don't necessarily write off what you've already got. You may actually have some very high quality data repositories within your organization, and you shouldn't reinvent the wheel. So if there's stuff that's there and it's good, fit for purpose, use it where you can. And I would say, just as a final point, in terms of what you should be looking to have in your kind of end state solution, you should be looking for something that's supportable, scalable. That's really important. Highly performant. You want a flexible ETL layer, and you want the fine-grained data controls. If you tick all those boxes, you're sorted.
Very good, excellent. Joe, over to you.
Yeah. If I take a little bit more of a business approach, the first question is, what type of analytics are you trying to do? And what are you trying to push into your sort of data platform layer? And so one of the things I spend a good amount of time with is our analysts themselves, and understanding the pain of their day of, okay, well, what are you struggling with in dealing with all this data? And again, back to my point earlier of more data adds more complexity. That's both true at the technical level and also at the user level too. And so one of the things we're looking at is, what are the services we can provide within that data layer that lifts up our analysts to do analytics? A lot of what they wind up doing day to day is data cleaning, data merging, integration, a lot of what I'd call sort of lower level data engineering work. And so in thinking about the architecture, you really have to take that into account and consider what is it that I'm delivering. And so we spend a good amount of time really trying to provide data that's actually gone through multiple levels of normalization, multiple levels of linkages to other data sets, and levels of cleaning as well, basically finding anomalies, dealing with those, things like that. And so our architecture really supports that, such that when our analysts get it, it's very much ready to use kind of out of the box. Now, that may not be applicable to all cases. Some people may want more of that lower level data. That's a value to them. And that's really where they're going to derive some of the value in their analysis. But that's one of the key things to consider is like, okay, what are the various services that my data warehouse is going to actually provide when defining what that architecture looks like. And then those services will at times map to one-off, whether cloud services, out-of-the-box packages, things like that. They can give you lift such that you don't have to build each one of those. But it's one of the key things that we think about when we think about building a data warehouse for analytics, or a data platform for analytics, is how's that going to work? The last thing I'd say is, what is the integration or the API level to the other analytical tools that they're using? So what are they using? What are their platforms? What are those tools? And how do I integrate with that seamlessly, such that, again, as minimally as possible, they don't have to worry about it. So if they're using Excel, how do I build plugins in Excel? If we're using proprietary platforms, how do we do that? And then other off-the-shelf analytical or data science or other types of toolkits, how do I integrate with my data store somewhat seamlessly? So again, they're not worrying about a lot of integration, writing a lot of integration code and things like that. They're focused on analytics and doing their analysis.
Very good, thank you, Joe. And last word on this to Ray. How should firms be approaching getting into, putting in place a modern data architecture from your standpoint?
Yeah, I look at the flexibility that you should be able to take your data wherever you want, and that could be within the 3 major cloud providers or on-prem. And I really think they really should consider, are you sharing your data? Are you giving it to another cloud account? And worry about the metadata. So I think there are solutions out there that allow you to deploy these data warehousing solutions all within your cloud account. And that gives you great power and flexibility. It gives you great buying power. You're not paying for things with credits or anything. You're paying with real dollars. And you can actually create the guardrails around different business groups so that, they don't spin out of control in terms of elasticity. And you can really keep an eye on them versus, a third party and sharing that data. So there's a lot of alternatives out there, options that people just don't know exist.
Very good. Thank you, Ray. Okay. I think we're actually out of time, so I'm going to wind things down. Really, suffice to say, really from me, just thanks to our fantastic panel, Hugh, Joe, Ray, Eric. Really appreciate you sharing your insights, guys. That was a great session today. This webinar will be available for download. This has been sponsored by Yellow Brick, and you're able to access this and share with your teams post-event. So on that note, we look forward to welcoming you to future webinars. Please do sign up for any you see on our website. And again, gentlemen, thanks so much for participating today.